I'm going to say something that might make you a bit uncomfortable. This soft girl era, the rest more, do less, protect your peace, unbothered, that girl, soft life, I think it's a beautiful correction. I genuinely do. I think it's real and I think it's necessary. Women were burning alive, literally on this like altar of productivity and performance and like looking well on the outside. And on the inside, though, there's this quiet collapse that was happening. This like call to rest, to receive, to stop hustling, so that doing all these things for love, for validation, to belong, to feel like they mean something, that rest, that is real medicine. But I think for a lot of us, and I really do mean a lot of us, I think this is kind of coming at an expense. I think a lot of us, especially in this healing and like spiritual spaces, it has quietly become something else. It has become this permission slip to stop growing, to avoid hard things, to call contraction boundaries, to call this like stagnation actually rest, and to really kind of dress up avoidance in this language of frequency and wellness and alignment and feminine energy, and never have to examine what's actually underneath. Never actually examine that our nervous systems are actually paying the price, and our life force is actually paying the price, our vitality, our will to live. Because what nobody's really saying out loud is that your body is not designed necessarily for ease all the time. You're not designed to always just be a lady who lunches. It was actually designed for challenge. It was designed to be tested, to be stretched, to meet something that's really difficult for you and to be able to overcome it, and to feel this like biological electricity that after you've done something hard. And when we take that away, when our life becomes too focused on comfort and ease, we systematically remove friction and challenge from our lives, from our businesses, and from our children's lives. We don't actually get more aliveness, we actually get less. Hi, I'm Dr. Shalane Carter. This is Be the Frequency, and today we're going to actually talk about that, how hard things actually, what they actually do to your biology. We're going to talk about some insights from some incredible business people from different places in medicine or in your biology that actually show you that one of the most important things you can do is to actually challenge yourself, but also encourage your children to be challenged. And what it actually means to live kind of in your full power as a woman in 2026, going into 2027, not this like watered down, protect your version of you, like the version that's actually alive, the one that's electric, that has so much like vitality in them that even as they age, they actually feel better. They feel more at home in their body. They feel more literally alive. So let's go. Okay, before we go any further on this, I want to be really clear about what I'm not saying in this episode. I'm not saying burn yourself out. I'm not saying that culture of boss babe and like that hustle culture mentality, that's healthy. I'm not. I've built my entire practice on literally helping people heal from those things. And as a woman, I am not saying more women should suffer. And I'm not saying that rest is bad. Okay, but what I am saying is there is a clear distinction, and this is actually brought up quite a bit in yogic culture. The practice, the asana practice that the West is very familiar with, was actually a way to be able to help to calm the mind and to be able to stretch the mind to experience the edges of their possibility in their physical body so that they could also experience that in their mind. So what I am actually saying in this episode, and I want to make this clear distinction, is there is a critical biological and like spiritual difference between rest that genuinely restores you and avoidance that slowly atrophies your life. Okay? And I think a lot of us, and particularly like women that are trying to heal or are in the holistic world, the natural world, spiritual entrepreneurs, people that have these types of businesses or in this world are curious about healing or trying to do all these different modalities, I think there's the distinction has honestly been lost. I think there has been so much focus on kind of that recovery aspect of the pendulum that swung too far the other way, that we think the opposite. And I talk about this, I've brought this point up several times, is that often when something isn't going well and there's dis-ease, we think swinging to the opposite side will give us the results that we want, that the opposite must be better, but it's actually somewhere in the middle. And that's what we're going to talk about today from a very biological standpoint and even like a career and business standpoint. We have essentially what I think we have done is like flatten everything. We have taken this like rest more and turned it into be uncomfortable less, be comfortable with avoidance. We have taken this like protect your energy and turn it into avoid anything that challenges me, anyone that challenges me, any experience that challenges me. And that's a very different thing. So this episode is all about getting that distinction and clarity back. It's about understanding that at the level of your actual biology, why your body actually needs hard things and what happens when you don't feed it those challenges. It's about reclaiming challenge, not as something that's meant to be managed or avoided, but it's actually this sacred practice that actually helps you up level in life, that actually helps you grow when you have challenging things. So I want to actually start a little bit with the science. And so I want to introduce you to a concept. So you see this a lot and it's talked about a lot in exercise. So we're going to kind of talk about that particular one, but it's this biological principle that says like small or moderate doses of a stressor or something that again challenges the body, something that disrupts the homeostasis of your system actually makes an organism stronger, not weaker. And so you see this all the time though in a biological evolutionary standpoint in all animals, is that when they're moved in different environments, things will start to change. I've talked about this before, but like the cute little pigs that you see on the farm, if you actually set them loose in the wild, they will start to develop more boar-like attributes during their lifetime. Their tusks will start to grow, their skin will start to darken, their hair will start to become more coarse, like they will biologically change based on their environment. And a lot of Bruce Lipton's work, and I love his book, The Biology of Belief, if you haven't read that yet, but how your environment, meaning your mind, but also your body, is what really dictates biological expression. And you actually kind of know this intuitively, that this is how exercise works. You know that it has to be a little bit difficult to break down these muscle fibers in order for it basically to tell the body, hey, we need to build up this muscle and come and to the muscle and be able to repair and restore it so that it's stronger than it was before. So over time, you get this, that's how you build a physique, so to speak, is actually tearing the muscle down little bit by little bit. And this is how, so even things like mild metabolic stress, so a slight caloric deficit, or again, a slight press, so a little bit more of a caloric intake that's a little bit higher gives you more nutrients for your body to work with, so you can actually start to, again, this is how the bodybuilding works, is this constant checks and balances, right, of food in, food out, tearing the muscle down, but giving it enough storage to actually be able to build it back up. And this helps upregulate like cellular repair or autophagy, insulin sensitivity, things like this. So in this way, I don't think when we talk about this rest, we really understand it at a biological level. We're talking often about it more of a mind level, because again, most people use their mind as their tool. This is also how cold exposure works. Shocking the system with cold, the body responds with increased norepinephrine, better circulation, improved mood regulation. The small dose is really the difference between this hormesis, this ability for your body to adapt and rise to the challenge, and where it actually hurts your body. So too much stress, right? This is where it becomes chronic without actually recovery. Now that's burnout. That becomes trauma. That becomes something that's stored in the nervous system and in the body and in the mind. But I think this is where, are we moving away from it in a way that's actually helpful? Like zero stress, zero challenge, zero friction for you, that's actually not peace. That is atrophy. of the mind, of the spirit, of the body. So I think we're seeing a huge decline in our, even when we look at how healthy we are, when we look at women in business, I'm seeing so many women who have really fed into kind of the hustle culture or really made their work their whole life. And they're so burnt out. They're not selling their business. They're stepping away from parts. They're like, I've made enough money, and they like want a break from all of it, because instead of these small challenges over time, it's overload, and that's when it becomes harmful. So I want to actually talk about something even more specific than just this autophagy, so this like cellular repair and things like this. So there is actually a protein in your brain called BDNF, so brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So I want you to think about this kind of as fertilizer for your neurons. So what BDNF is, it triggers the growth of new neural connections. And this is what keeps your brain to be really adaptive and plastic, as people say, like your brain is plastic. What it means is it's malleable, it's changing. Depending on what you are exposing it to, the brain adapts. And so you need to also know what triggers this adaptivity, this growth of the brain. Challenge, novelty, physical exertion, okay? Doing something that's physically hard, doing things that are cognitively demanding. Okay, so learning something that's new and difficult. I think I never really understood why I observed this phenomenon, and I always kind of reached for books that challenged my brain and challenged the way my brain thinks, because I was listening to a podcast today. I want to say it was on Diary of a CEO, and they were interviewing something about AI, and they were talking about, he was essentially years and years ago at the beginning of AI, he was talking about how he recognized that they were building it for good, but that doesn't mean it was going to be built and used for good. The intentions were good, but he was seeing how things were changing. And he said, however, the difference is that AI only knows what you tell it, but it doesn't actually give new creative thoughts. That will always be a human's part. And for the past 10 plus years, 12 years, 13 years, something like that, I always gravitated towards educational learning because I recognized what he said was intelligence breeds intelligence. When I would read something, or when I would take a class, or when I would learn, it would make me smarter in so many other areas. So what I recognized is when I started doing, my business was really successful, and then I was like, okay, I think I need some like business training, because people were asking me for business help. This was like 15 years ago. They were asking me to help them grow their business. And I was like, oh, maybe I need to I'm not quite sure how to package it more than anything else. Like, I know what I'm working is doing, and I can see and I observe other people's businesses, but I started really listening to a lot of business podcasts. I started to read a lot of business books. And I started to do all this. And so when that would happen, I would notice it would trigger all of these other thoughts for me. It would trigger my mind to start to work, and in ways that, until I kind of got in that state of learning, it was really, not to say difficult, but it was like it started that momentum and my mind would take off. It was like that small little intelligence input allowed my brain to grow 10 times. And I needed this exposure to something that challenged the way that I think, challenged what I was already doing, challenged the way that I viewed something, so that I could think differently, move differently, and more importantly, create something different. So here's the thing. So back to BDNF, is that what triggers it is challenge, right? And novelty, physical exertion. We talked about that. But what does not trigger it, what does not trigger new and change new neurons or new connections in the brain, I shouldn't say new neurons, new neural connectivity in the brain, is ease. When things are too easy. When there's a lot of comfort, familiarity, that repetition of something familiar, low demand activity. So things that you can do on autopilot. So when you chronically avoid challenges, what's happening is you're engineering this life for maximum comfort with minimum friction. And so your BDNF stops. Your ability for your brain to adapt, change, evolve, and grow literally stops. So when that drops, so does mood, so does motivation, cognitive sharpness. So I notice when I'm not learning, I also forget things more easily. I like blank more on like words. And so like, it's like this felt sense of being able to recall, this like aliveness of your mind, but also of your spirit. And researchers have actually linked chronically low BDNF to depression. And this isn't because depression makes people sedentary, although it does, but because chronic sedentary ease, right? Constant easy life, constant avoidance of things that challenge you contribute to this neurochemistry of depression. What does it, Elle Woods say that like something about like somebody who like teaches exercise wouldn't kill somebody because endorphins, happy people don't kill because whatever, and neurons, it's like something in Legally Blonde. I kind of always think, not obviously of that exact line because I can't recall it. I clearly need to learn something, maybe need to like trigger that growth in my mind. But it's understanding that like learning these new things and movement and novelty and trying all these different things, it's one of my favorite reasons, or one of the reasons why I really love the training that I went through for yoga, is that novelty, like creating novel parts to your yoga sequencing, was actually a part of the training because it helps with your brain. So then let's also talk about the second thing that has to do with your biology is like dopamine. So dopamine is, I think, one of the most like kind of misunderstood chemicals in the wellness conversation right now. Everybody talks about dopamine in like a pleasure chemical and like the reward center. And we're talking a lot about like the GLP-1, like low pleasure center. And like because food is pleasurable, you stop seeking other pleasurable activities. So the thing is, your brain releases dopamine is something that your brain releases when something feels good. And that's kind of what the media and like, you know, on all these social media sites, it's kind of advertised as, but that's not quite right. So dopamine is actually the anticipation and effort chemical. So think about it more like that. It's not actually the reward part. It's the pursuit of reward. And this starts to spike when something becomes difficult, when you are challenged during the actual effort part. And as it releases, it feels a lot more satisfying. You feel a lot more fulfilled when you complete the hard thing. So it's actually, dopamine is released in that middle part where the effort is coming in, or the pursuit, or again, even the drive to go get a coffee instead of making coffee at home. It's that there's a pursuit of something that you think will bring you joy or satisfaction. And so this means that the dopamine system is specifically designed around actually effort and reward cycles. So when you remove the effort part, and when everything is easy, everything is delivered, everything is comfortable, you start to flatten that cycle out of hills and valleys. Over time, chronic, easy lives lead to chronically depleted dopamine tone. And this is why this is important, okay? This means that there is less motivation, less drive, less of that feeling that your life has this electricity, because that is where the dopamine starts. So we're scrolling and we're getting these dopamine hits, but you're literally just getting the end result, like the reward, the not having to go shopping to buy your clothes, being able to buy them online, not having to put in the effort to lose weight, but taking a peptide, not having to make the coffee at home. You're just going to go drive and get it, right? There's no real effort in like learning the art of something, learning the art of, I don't know what you call espresso making or latte making, a barista, right? A barista. But I don't know if that's like technically the art, but you get it. A barista is somebody who makes beverages. But when you take out that effort part, you start to really flatline. So your life becomes just, and you've heard people say this, I have everything I need. I should be so happy, but I just feel blah. I feel flat. I feel like my life is like the, what is it? The Truman Show or the Groundhog Day. It's like the same thing over and over. This happens because you're not pursuing anything. Your dopamine level and like, again, the ebb and flow that you need it to have is not there. You're only getting the receivership, but none of the effort in between. So it's not actually giving you the amount of dopamine that you're needing. And because now you're also not, again, creating more of those new neuron connections because you're not learning anything new. Everything feels like Groundhog Day. And so this is kind of where that life force piece, which is where it kind of really gets into like my world, life force energy, prana, chi, whatever you want to call it. So in traditional Chinese medicine, you talk about Jing, which is foundational essence that you're born with. And then you have the Wei Qi, which is like the vital force that animates and protects the body. In Ayurveda, it is Ojas. So in quantum biology, it maps as like biophotonic coherence. So this is the quality and the organization of the light that your cells emit through communication. So essentially it's how your body is organizing communication and, again, input versus output, okay? So every single one of these frameworks, whether it's, again, these Eastern practices or it's something you're gonna call it quantum biology, they all kind of agree on the same thing, is that vitality is not something you conserve by doing less. So I think the thought was, we're so overworked, we should do less. That's not necessarily the case, and I think it's why we're seeing a really huge uptick in hobbies. So it's actually generated, so this life force energy, chi or prana, or more coherence in your field is generated through use. It's not by rest. So this has happened through directed effort, which is where the challenge meets your capacity, okay? The muscle that you never use doesn't stay in a healthy state. It starts to waste away. Your life force energy is the same. If you don't use it for things to create in life, it starts to atrophy. Your soul, your spirit, your life force starts to dissolve, so to speak. You need less because you're doing less. Your electromagnetic field actually starts to become closer to the body instead of expanding outward, where you're open to new ideas, you're interacting with people and they're learning from you and you're learning from them. I want to give you something that I was kind of, I didn't really mean to like stumble on this, but I was listening to something that was talking about, they were interviewing a man, and he dropped out of Stanford to build a software company called Trilogy, okay? And he did this, he was like I think he is the youngest member of the like Forbes 400 or something like that, which is like incredible. He made all of this money and then he disappeared for a really 25 years. And he was building like this really prolific software acquisition companies in the world, like all behind the scenes. And then he comes back, he's literally, I think, only done one podcast episode like 20 years ago, comes on, does this podcast episode, and he's not coming back to actually build another tech company. He's coming back to build the future of education. And it really got me thinking. It's called Alpha School. You can look it up and kind of some of his thought processes behind it. But what's fascinating to me is that I'm like, he didn't step back from the limelight. He didn't step back from running all these companies to do nothing with his life, to retire. He stepped back and was now in the role that is more close to fatherhood and family, and was in that more, and recognized there's a hole in education, that we are doing our children a disservice by not keeping up with the way that technology and evolution really is changing. That it wasn't just, the kids just didn't need to learn AI. They needed to learn that so much of technology is going to take over what we think is important. So how do we optimize our life? And he was talking about this part of it is really what kind of got me. And I was like, oh, this is so interesting. So he took a bunch of these like second graders and he was like, do you think you can run a 5K? And all of them were like, no. And then he asked the parents, and the parents were like, no, my kids can't run a 5K. And he was like, okay. And then they started doing training. They would run a little while, time them, and they challenged them to get better. And I don't know if it was at the end of the year or what the time duration was, but the second graders could run a 5K. Now, this wasn't like militant training. This was that nobody thought they could do it, which was the point of the conversation. They were talking about some other things like kindergartners being able to climb like a 40-foot rock wall. They were talking about 8th graders competing in Tough Mudders. And not because this is like mean or cruel, but what they recognized is that if you put kids against their parents, kids were always trying to beat their parents. So what if they just were never told that they had the potential to do it in 2nd grade? They were never told they had the potential to do it in, to climb the 40-foot rock wall in kindergarten, or to run the Tough Mudder in 8th grade. Like, this is more that our culture has forgotten that kids and us as humans are wired for challenge. We are wired to rise to the occasion. And I think that's where kind of this hustle culture gets confused, is that it is actually about challenging ourselves, but it's not challenging ourselves at the expense of everything else. And that was the thing. They didn't train all day. They didn't forget their studies. They didn't do any of these things. They just started to give them instruction and support and training. They started to prep them and say, hey, this is possible for you. And this is where, like, what drove them to perform was like to push themselves, to wanting to be better. Kids naturally want to learn things. Now, it doesn't have to be physical activities. This could be, again, learning crafts. This could be learning to bake or cook. This could be learning how to draw, learning how to dance. Is that the one thing that they always wanted to do was beat their parents. They didn't care necessarily about being number one of their group. They cared about beating their parents. They didn't want gold stars. It wasn't praise from a teacher. There's this like deep biological drive to change or to pass the generation before you, to do more than the people who came before you, to rise higher, to go further, to accomplish more. And that is not socialized into children. That's not something that they've learned from observation. I think that's something that's biologically wired in, because life force for the next generation demands it. Look at the way that this generation, especially that like millennial generation, and you're seeing it bleed into others as well, but is doing a lot more therapy, healing work, things like that. The generation before did not have the resources. We have the resources. We're making a change. We're trying to do better because we have different knowledge. Okay? We now have more technology. We're at first, again, everybody's like, great, we're going to use it for all these things. And again, then you start to see how it can be used for things that aren't of benefit. And so now you're seeing some of the younger millennial and younger generations being like, there needs to be caps for some of these. Just like there used to be certain pharmaceuticals that were on the market, or they used to think smoking cigarettes was healthy, is that we learn and then we adapt and we make changes. And so it's really like, it's about being able to rise to your full capacity. And I think you need to hear that. I think you need to understand that when you design an environment, whether it be a child's environment or your environment, that when you start to remove challenge, when you start to protect people too much from discomfort, you rob them of not being able to know their potential. You don't give them the opportunity to try harder because you're so quote unquote worried. You deprive them of the very thing that literally their brain, their nervous system is trying to generate. This lived experience of what their human capacity is. So like, I think more than anything, like 90% of this is being able to know that the potential is there for you. This is not having the right curriculum, right technology, right motivation, right? Motivation cannot be manufactured through ease. It's generated through challenges being met. It's actually developed through difficulty, through having to overcome something. So when your body learns that something is possible for you, all of a sudden, all these new opportunities open. I remember I was not an athlete growing up at all. I started getting into health and wellness because I wanted to be able to keep up with my kids, and I was overweight, and I did not want to be the mom that couldn't run on the fun run days. I didn't want to be the parent that couldn't get up and down off the floor because I was too heavy to play with my children. So I got into health. I lost 50 pounds. And through that, I remember one person said to me one time, it was a trainer at the gym, and he was like, "Oh, you're such an athlete." I was like, "Oh, I'm not an athlete." At this point, I hadn't competed in any bodybuilding competitions or anything. And he's like, "No, this is how athletes train. You show up every single day, and you're trying to do better than the day before. Like, you're working on your body actively to get better. That's an athlete." And that phrase changed the way that I looked at my body. It changed the way that I walked, the way that I thought of myself, the way that I thought about athletics, the way that I thought of potential for myself. And I think that's the thing, is sometimes we put these guardrails on of you can't be a really good mother and be a really good business person. Do I think if you're giving 100% work, can you really give 100% at home? No. There's only 100% of you to go around. And I think the problem is that we were told that we can give 100% to both. And I think that's the misconception. It's not that you need to have more rest. It's that you need to pull back in some areas so you can rest, so you can do things that feel restorative. And I just think that's a huge difference and a huge pivot that I think that we need to make. So here's what I do know about children and people, is that removing their life force, or removing challenges, I think is slowly killing your motivation. I think it is slowly flattening your dopamine. It's depleting your life force energy. And this leaves you feeling more miserable, less fulfilled, I think under-resourced, less challenged. And I think what happens then is, as adult women, we're telling each other that the answer is just like the soft life, gentle and more protected. And I'm not. Femininity, there is rage there. Have you ever watched a mother in the wild? She is fucking fierce. She is not soft and laying back and taking it easy, and she is rising to the challenge. And I think this low challenge idea, I also think that's then what, when I think of the long-term side effects, I'm like, what examples are you showing to your children? Because your children are always mimicking you. Even as adults, they're watching you. They're watching how you do life. And it's one thing to take a step back and to rest. It's a whole other thing to avoid challenges. And what if protecting your peace for some of us has become this experience that has left us feeling more dead than alive inside? And I want to be fair, because I think this movement came from something real. And I've touched on this throughout this entire conversation. I think women, especially high achieving women, which is a lot of my listeners, entrepreneurial women, women who are actively doing healing work, you were running yourself into the ground 100%. Again, like we talked about, you were trying to give 100% both places, and that's not real. And you had internalized this message that your value came from your output and that rest was laziness. And I think that's the difference, is that it's not swinging to the other side. It's not that there's no output. And that needing anything or asking for help was weakness, and that the way to be worthy of rest was to do more. And the correction that we were trying to make was basically to just stop doing that. The correction that needs to be made is that you do need to rest, but you need to understand that you're not a machine, and your worth is not tied to your output, and you're allowed to receive things, and you're allowed to say no. And in fact, that's one of the most powerful things that you can do in order to manage the way that you output effort and allow yourself input and receivership. And I think this was right. I think this was necessary, and I think this saved a lot of people. But I think, again, the message has swung too far the other way. And I think when we come back, it's not avoiding the difficult conversations. It's having those difficult conversations. It's going back to school. It's challenging yourself to build a business that's a lot more sustainable, to do it differently, to not just walk away from a business, but to understand that what you built might be helping people, but it's doing a disservice to yourself. And how do you reconfigure that so that you can give, let's say, your 40% to your business and growth and things that light you up and challenge you in that way, and also then be able to give 60% to yourself, your home, your family, your personal life. I'm not like, because my issue is that resting in your feminine, because this became this like framework for avoidance. I'm not available for that energy. Became a way to avoid hard conversations. It became a way to avoid friction. And so many people are healing, or they're healed, or things like that. And essentially it's just been stagnation giving a spiritual name. And I think we need to assess this for what it really is, and we need to get specific. And we need to look at like you as this brilliant, capable person, and using that language of alignment, of frequency, of flow, to not necessarily avoid the things that would actually grow yourself, your business, but actually using those things in the context of capacity, in the context of what would you like to create, creativity. Like this is a huge, I think, shift, and it's not necessarily, again, we don't want avoidance dressed up in spiritual clothing. And I think the body knows the difference. And so it's like this desire to do things, but being like, no, it's okay for me to rest today. And it's like, the reality is you can do things even when you're a little tired. Just because it's like the people that won't do certain workouts because they're on certain parts of their period. I'm here to tell you, like, I know so many people that won't do a difficult workout. They'll do like stretching or like really like yin yoga on their period. You guys, I have some of the best workouts on my period. I listen to my body. If I feel rested, if I feel energized, if I feel ready, if at any point during my workout I feel like it's too much, I'm like, okay, that's enough for me, and I leave. But I don't let that just because I'm on my period and some guru on Instagram said that you weren't supposed to work out on your period, I don't let that dictate my whole life. And I think because we are chronically under-challenged, our nervous system is not a regulated nervous system. It's bored. And out of boredom feels very similar to depression sometimes. It feels this like flatness. And so this absence of drive and like this kind of vague life, it leaves you feeling like something is missing. And so I think in this sense, you are capable of so much more than you think. But I think rest always needed to be a part of the equation, and it wasn't factored in. And now we are factoring it in. And I think being a lady who lunches, and I kind of use that term like lightly, but jokingly, so to speak, but like being somebody who doesn't challenge yourself and the only thing that you have to look forward to is lunch with your girlfriends is not a well-lived life. True feminine power, it's not passive. And it is receptive. There's a profound difference. Receptivity is active, it's engaged, there's discernment there. This capacity to take in more, to feel more, to respond with more wisdom, that is actually the opposite of collapse. That is the opposite of flat. And so if you look at every like archetype of feminine power across human history, the warrior priestess, the medicine woman, the wise elder, the wild woman, this like dark goddess, like all of these figures, they are not soft. They are rooted in a force that is fierce, and it is full, and it is alive. They are forces of nature. Softness was actually never the point. Here's the biggest part. Safety was. And safety is not the same as avoidance. And so I think one of the key components in feeling like you can be challenged again is doing work to be able to create a more resilient nervous system. So you can be stretched closer to your capacity. Recognize that's your capacity. That's what you have to give at this moment, and then rest. Then come back at it. Okay, and whether that's, the next day or the next week or the next month, it's once you have this really deep felt sense of safety, this doesn't come from the absence of challenge. This comes from knowledge, knowing yourself better. And this is learned through lived experience, that you can handle what is coming at you. So then what do we actually do with this? I want to talk about challenge as more of a spiritual practice and not a punishment. It's not hustle. This is, I think of it more as initiation. In deep spiritual practices, there was always initiation, and there was vision quests, right? There was fasting, there were different trials, periods of deliberate hardship. What's interesting is a lot of ancient cultures actually sought out hardship. Not because, again, when we kind of take away these rights or this like passage into adulthood, you've taken away the ability to rise to a challenge. And I think the older generations knew that when you rob the younger generations of challenge, you develop a very emotionally stunted society. And so what's happened is we've engineered hardship out of modern life. So hardship forges something, though, that comfort can't. And I think that's the difference, is that hardship is not being punished. It's allowing you to reveal what's inside of you and start to know your limits. And I think this is where actually your medicine is. This is where you find kind of like, you can't really find out what you're made of. You can't find the depths of who you are if you only swim at the surface. Like, you have to be able to go to the edge. You have to be able to challenge your capacity. You have to, again, in that sense, get those reps that push you to failure. And the moment that you do, and it's like, that's why I always tell people, like when I've taught yoga and stuff for years, that I want you to go to the point where your mind wants to tell you to move out of the shape and see if you can take one more breath, and then 3 more breaths, and then 5 more breaths. Not because I want you to be in pain, and it's not, that sharp pain, but that dull ache. And for those of you who practice yoga, all I have to say is pigeon pose. You know what I'm talking about. Like, you're at that where you just want to move, but you don't, because if you can stay for 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths, you create a nervous system in a safe environment, right? Nothing's happening to you. But you start to retrain your mind how it responds when something is a little difficult. When you want to stop doing something, when you want to shy away from this discomfort, and you stay anyways. So I actually want to leave you, and I want you to just kind of sit with this question, and I want you to feel it. Again, this is a lot of body stuff, because the mind, it wants to avoid discomfort, right? So I want you to feel this rather than think it. When was the last time you actually did something that stretched you? Not something overwhelming, not trauma, not something that made you feel burnt out. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about sitting at this edge of your capacity. This was when I was hosting yoga teacher trainings. This is one of the things when we would start to sit in meditation. You started to know this come up really quickly. And the longer that we made this silent meditation a practice, the less that people would fidget and move, because they're starting to increase their capacity to sit with something that's uncomfortable in not only their body, but more importantly in their mind. Okay. So when was the last time that you, again, did something that genuinely stretched you when you didn't know if you could for sure do it, and you did it anyways? Like, what did that feel like in your body when you were done? That feeling, that's expansion. That's that electricity, that aliveness, that feeling of, I can't believe I just did that. That is chi or prana or life force moving. That is your biophotonic field starting to light up and expand. That is life force being generated, not depleted. And you can't force this from chronic ease. You can't manufacture this. You won't find it in your comfort zone, my friend. And the comfort zone is perfectly fine for rest. But this is not the place that you want to live. And this is why I think this soft girl era is really killing us. that not going to the gym, but just because you don't feel motivated, is physically, but also mentally killing you. Because every time I have gone to the gym, I don't feel worse when I leave, except for when I hurt myself one time. But besides that, but I mean mentally, and everyone else that you talk to that goes to exercise regularly will tell you, on the days even when I didn't want to go, I never left feeling worse than when I walked in. You might kind of feel the same, a little bit of an upper, maybe not a whole lot. But that space between where the dopamine is created, the effort is there, it at least pushes it just a bit, because you also had to put in effort. There had to be some type of time and space in between. What's interesting too is I see this in homeopathy as well. So one of the homeopathic philosophies is that like cures like. So the same substance that produces in a healthy person the very thing that creates symptoms in a healthy person will actually cure a sick person. So the thing that looks like the problem is usually your medicine. One of my teachers used to say, like, if you don't have time to meditate for 5 minutes, that you need 20. Well, if you don't have 20 minutes, you need an hour. Challenge is the same way. The thing that might feel like a bit of a stretch, that conversation that you're avoiding, that thing that the launch of the product that you have, that physical, maybe like workout regimen or whatever that you wanted to do and you just haven't, maybe you want to run a marathon, but you're not training for it. Like, you just need this school that this guy is developing that, talked about how the second graders ran a 5K. Like, you need the right support. You need the right dose, right? So you need the right amount of training. Often that is the precise thing that heals you. You need to try to launch a product so that you can have feedback for what to do differently next time, even if you only sell one thing. And this is not because like suffering is noble or anything like that. And it's because meeting these hard things and surviving them gives the nervous system a reference point of like what's missing. And also what is actually your capacity. This lived experience creates your own resilience. You can't develop things like resilience or courage without having to go through something that requires effort. So this is not like toxic positivity where we're being like, nothing is wrong, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's not like that. This is actually probably one of the deepest laws of medicine applied to your life. Okay? So here's what I want to invite you into. It's not a revolution. It's not dismantling of your ladies' lunch and everything you've built in your soft girl era or taking more rest. It's looking at this week, what is one thing that you have been avoiding because it's uncomfortable or you don't want to do it? Because maybe it stretches you or it challenges you. It's not your favorite thing to do. One conversation you've been like avoiding, again, like something you've been afraid to launch. I want you to take one creative risk that you feel genuinely exposed. Not because you're trying to really prove anything and not because you're trying to hustle, but because you're trying to generate some type of biological, somatic, spiritual experience of what is your capacity to remind your nervous system in a language that it knows, which is experience, not thought, okay? That you are capable of so much more than you have actually been asking of yourself. That is frequency work. And so when people want these like super spiritual like rituals, I'm like, do the fucking dishes every day. Exercise every day. Meditate every day. Do these really simple life things. Make your bed every day. Because if that's something that you avoid and you know it would make you feel better and you know you want the result of that thing, that's the thing you need. That's your medicine. I want you to sit with this after this episode. This isn't a to-do list to like write down everything. We're not going back to hustle. We are going back to what makes me 1%, what would stretch me 1% today? What would put me on this edge? And they say like do one thing a day that actually like scares you or whatever. And I'm saying this not in like a trauma way, like I don't know if I can do this, blah, blah, blah. But you need to remember that you are capable of so much more than you have capped yourself at in the name of protecting your peace. You deserve a life that is both peaceful and fulfilling. Even, again, like when people are like, oh, more rest, I'm like, have you actually ever meditated? Do you know how fucking hard that is? Have you ever sat down and tried to silence your thoughts? You want to talk about rest? That's not restful. It's sitting, it looks restful. And I think this is why monks or people in spiritual practices sometimes are some of the most resilient and can withstand some of these very physical things. And it's why they're often studied, resisting, being able to change their body temperature on command, being able to resist like extreme pain or things like this, because they have trained their mind through practices that bring them up to a challenge every single day. So this is not about being performative for other people. This is a challenge to look at what would actually make your life better. And why are you avoiding doing the things in between? What is it? What are you scared of? Why are you scared of seeing what's out there for you? What's more for you? What makes you feel more alive and in your body and more electric? That is the frequency of a woman in her power. Okay? Your children want to beat you, not disrespect you. And that's biology. Okay? This is, if we are allowing as women and as, this kind of in-between generation of we're not kids, but we're not the elders yet. And maybe you are on one of those spectrums, but if you're in the in-between, one of the best things that you could do is to constantly look to how you can rise, how you can find your edge. Okay, because that is biologically hardwired. And so when we stop finding our edge, we stop growing. I think this is part of the reason why too, as you get older, people are like, they're so stuck in their ways. They have a hard time seeing things from my perspective because they stopped actively seeking out challenge. You want to stay young? Seek out challenge. That will keep you young because, again, it develops new parts of your brain. So, the question is, like, what are you rising to? Like, where have you gotten comfortable with your peace that you've forgotten what it actually feels like to be fully alive, fully, like, electric? For those of you who are maybe working through health stuff, you might want to book a Quantum 8 consultation. That's a great way for you to, again, start to commit to maybe a protocol that could advance your health. For those of you who want to work on your business and you're like, oh, I've been avoiding some of those things, or I have this idea, I have a Which Chakra is Your Superpower in Business quiz. If you're wanting to grow your business and feel like you have a community of people who are in that same stretch zone and stretch part of their life that you are in, I have a program called The Path where, again, your path is going to be your own, but it's important that we have these support, again, the right support and, the education, the training, things like that to be able to make those changes. So you can always join the waitlist for that below in the comments or in the show notes. But really start to look at where you've gotten comfortable with complacency and where you started to flatline in your life and what else could possibly be out there for you. And maybe you need to listen to this episode a couple of times to start to really get yourself to think. But I encourage you to hit the subscribe button because the aim of this podcast is always to be able to stretch you and stretch your capacity to feel, stretch yourself on a emotional, spiritual, physical level. So if that's your jam, this is the place for it. So until next time, cheers.